Thanks. This is kind of a weird setup, so if it goes out, I apologize. Hello to everybody that is joining us on Facebook. My name is Lindsay Kujawa, and I am from RE Theater. We are a theater education and consulting company whose mission is to inspire educators, young artists, and communities to deeply engage with challenging storytelling in order that goes beyond the black and white so that people are able to be transformed by the gray areas that live within these difficult stories. And so I'm so excited for you guys to be joining us. We are going to be doing a series of Facebook Lives to kick off our summer education series. So we're bringing all of our different educators on to do a short Facebook Live to talk about some really awesome things. And today I am joined by Cessa Betancourt, who is a Seattle artist who does pretty much everything. So she's a theater maker, she's a choreographer and a director, and she works as a teaching artist, and she works in the nonprofit sector. And so, yeah, she's multi-talented. And she's going to be working with us this summer, teaching a class called Understanding Casting and Show Ethics in 2018, which is a huge topic. If you're an educator, you know this. So before we jump into that, Cessa, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, and so I would love, do you want to just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I would love to. Yeah, like Lindsay said, I'm a theater maker. I also choreograph movement for theater. I choreograph dance. I'm an actor. I'm going to be directing this summer for the first time in a long time, which is very exciting. Yeah, I'm part of a multidisciplinary ensemble called Heron, and we sort of do multidisciplinary theater, music, dance pieces. I also produce a storytelling event called She is Fierce, which is basically a nonfiction storytelling event that goes up every few months where people submit their stories to a theme, people who are female or non-binary identifying, and then we pair them with artists and they collaborate, and then we do like a couple of nights of performance. So I'm also a producer, so I do a lot of different things, but mostly my creative work is focused in physical storytelling and social justice and human connection, and yeah, that's pretty much the things that I do. Yeah, and then I also teach as well.
Awesome. I mean, I obviously am a huge fan of your work and the type of theater that you engage with. And I'm super excited for you to share all of your knowledge, especially around race and equity and gender and ethnicity with us today and this summer. So the reason I really wanted to bring you on to talk about the 3 ways to know if a show is a good selection for your school is because if you are an educator, or probably honestly, even if you're a theater maker of any kind, or a student of any kind, you know, first of all, as an educator, how difficult it is to find a show that works for you. Yeah. And if you're a student, how much like you are hoping that your educator or your director picks the right show, right? So show selection is huge. And it is one of the biggest stress points that I hear from educators. Yeah. And especially now with the changing practices and ways that we view race and ethnicity and gender on stage, this is an even more of a stressor for educators, especially for people who don't live in places like Seattle where this is talked about all the time. Okay. So we want to help you figure this out because it is no longer an excuse to be ignorant, to plead ignorance as a reason. And it's a huge issue that could land you with a negative reputation at the least, and at the most with potentially a lawsuit and losing your job. So let's not to be like doomsday, but it's a big topic. And so today we're gonna talk about a bunch of different topics within there. And I'm going to stop talking so much and let Cessa. So if you guys are watching, though, please, if we say something that you have a question about, feel free to type it on in. If you are watching on Instagram, I am reading your comments sideways. So I apologize if I turn my head and I'm like, what are you saying? And if you are hearing anything that you're like, oh my gosh, I totally love this, it totally resonates with me, give us a thumbs up or a heart. We want to know where you guys are all at and meet you there. So cool. So Cessa, you have 3 things for us to remember when we're looking at show selection. So what's the first thing that we need to keep in mind?
Yeah. So the very first thing is the material accessible and doable for your students and staff? And I've sort of broken this into sort of like two different lenses. One is like logistically, is whatever show that you're thinking about picking like logical and practical for your staff to handle, first of all, but also for your students to handle. The example that I sort of gave Lindsay before was, if you're doing a dance heavy show, do you have a dance teacher or a dance team coach or someone that you're contracting in to oversee all of the dance, all of the choreography, all of the rehearsals? And do you also have a student that you're comfortable naming dance captain who can sort of help support the dance? And also, dance heavy shows means sort of twice as much work and twice as much rehearsal.
Thank you for saying that. I think that is a huge, huge thing. As a, I used to make my living being a choreographer, and I just do it for fun now. But that is something that I have encountered at so many schools where they're like, "We're going to give you the normal amount of choreography time," and I'm like, "Cool, not possible."
Yeah,
because the show has like 7 dance numbers in it.
Right, and there's a
huge consideration. I'm so glad you brought that up.
And like dance numbers where the whole time all the students are dancing.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so logistically, if you're going to do something similarly, you know, like look at your budget with your administrator. If you're doing something like Sweetie Todd that is obviously going to require a like really extensive set,
yes.
What does that mean for you? Do you have the volunteer power and the staff power and the student power to be able to build and execute those things in the amount of time that you have? And also, do you have the money to be able to execute those things? There's so many things you could do with minimal set and minimal costumes, but you just sort of have to see logistically where you're at and what your resources are, and then go from there, because sort of forcing a square peg into a round hole and trying to like take on a lot of dance when no one who's involved in the production has a lot of dance experience will just stress you out and just make it more difficult to make a good production. And then also like material wise, is it material that you think the students who might audition will be able to handle? And that's to say sort of like, is it something that will challenge them? Yes, but if it's something that maybe you think is music that is really advanced, you know, there's a huge difference between Rodgers and Hammerstein's and Jason Robert Brown, you know, like there's a very large difference skill set wise. And sometimes it can be inequitable to do really hard music if you don't have the support at your school to be able to support those students and to train those students, because there might be a couple students who really excel in the show who have access to other training outside of their school. And they're having a great time and they're doing really well and excelling in the show. And then everyone else is really struggling. And so also coming at it from like is this material something that the students are going to be able to really sink their teeth into and latch onto, and also challenge them? Like there's sort of a sweet spot there.
Yeah, that's a really, really great point that I hear a lot of times, and I see a lot when in schools, is there are those kids that have that training. And obviously they are going to be able to excel at a different rate, but it's really hard to find that balance of making sure that everybody has an opportunity and a chance, and making sure that those students it's that constant, as an educator, it's that constant, like, where do you find the middle?
Totally.
Like, do that in our classrooms. How do you do that in the rehearsal room too?
Yeah, for sure. And so pick a show that will challenge you and your staff and your students and your community while also not overwhelming you. Because also if you pick something that is completely out of your depth as a director or as a teacher, like you're not going to have any idea how to direct it. And that's going to make it more difficult for you to support your students. And so the material has to sort of support everybody, and you have to sort of come at it from like, okay, is this logistically and like material wise, like is the content and the actual production something that we can do in, you know, the 2 months, the 3 months, the 4 weeks, you know, whatever that we have.
And I think that's so, I mean, there's 2 points that you said. So going back to the vocal component and making sure students can do that. One thing, educators, I would just flag that I've seen a lot recently is if you pick a contemporary show that is sung pop or contemporary wise, you have ready to retrain your students how to sing.
Yeah.
Because I see a lot of kids coming with getting over singing and damaging their vocal cords.
Yeah.
Or not knowing how to approach that music. Like you cannot pick a rock musical and have everybody singing legit because that sounds silly.
Right.
So that's huge.
Yeah. And similarly, doing something that has like a giant vocal range when you don't have the time to sort of build up your student skill.
Yes.
That's also something that you want to like watch out for, is doing something that you're going to be able to either like support your students in or meet them where they're at.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing too with the content is educators, just as or anybody that's making theater, I think a lot of times like we'll go and see a show and be like, oh my gosh, I want to direct that show now.
For sure.
Wanting to direct a show is different than being able to do that and being able to call your own skill sets in, because you have to be a master storyteller. It's not enough to be able to be like, look, this is what one school did. Let me copy their blocking. Let me copy their sets. Let me copy their costuming. Because that's not actually art making. That's just copying.
Yeah.
So making sure that you have a grasp on that story and being able to understand the beginning, the middle, the end. What are all the action points? How do we get to point A to point B? And if you can't, that it totally makes sense to forgo it and maybe put it on into the future when you have more time to examine.
For sure. Yeah. Definitely. Do you want me to move on to the second one?
Yeah, let's do this. Let's go second. So the first one was make sure that the material is like you can handle the material, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
The second one, and this one I think is one that most high schools run into. I think even colleges and I think even companies in certain areas run into all the time is, does the show that you're considering have specific roles that have to be a certain race, gender, or ability? And I think that a lot of times, I think especially in educational settings, we sort of overlook whether or not something like someone has to be a person of color or someone has to be a woman or has to be a man, or is someone who is differently abled. Like I think we sort of overlook that and sort of like consider, colorblind or genderblind casting, which I think is good in some cases, and in some cases it can be detrimental to the material and it can seem inequitable. And so I think if you do have a show where one or more of the characters is race or gender or ability specific, then you should have a pool in your, you should have at least 20% of the students who are auditioning fit that mold. Because the problem with choosing a show where, one of the characters has to be a person of color and you have, say, like, maybe 2 people audition who are people of color, that means then that you have to tokenize that student and you have to cast that student regardless. And that can be a detrimental experience for that student, but can also, you have to sort of question why you're doing the show in the first place if it's not material that you can support. And if you do want to bring in that demographic of student, then you need to do the work to do the outreach in your community, in your school, to make sure that you have at least probably 15 to 20% of people who are auditioning who fit that either race or gender or ability.
That first of all, I mean, when we were talking about this, I mentioned I was like, oh my gosh, I love that you have a number. That 20% I think is huge, and I totally agree with that. Because it is tough, like especially if you're a school in a rural community, and you want to do a show, like if Hairspray is what you want to do, but you only have like 5 students of color, you really that is the only option they have for that production,
right?
And so making sure that you are selecting material that doesn't tokenize your students is super important.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've heard, so maybe this is a thing that maybe you can throw at you. Like, one thing I've heard from a lot of educators is like, well, but then that takes a lot of shows off the table for me if I have to be so conscious of race and ethnicity. And I don't know if you have any advice or if it's just like, sorry.
No, I think correct. I think it does take a lot of shows off the table for you, and you just have to either be okay with that if that's the demographic that you're working with, which is just unfortunately like a symptom of sort of like whatever community or whatever group of students that you're working with. You have to, again, like sort of like that the material fits you and fits your school. And also, if you're frustrated with that, then you can also do the work, if you're a school that other students from different schools can audition for your production.
Oh, yeah.
You have to sort of do the work. If you want half the students that are auditioning for your show to be kids of color, to be female identifying, if you want non-binary students or trans students to be auditioning, then you need to do the work to make sure that they're invited. And make sure that all of the students of color in your community or in your high school are aware that the auditions are happening and that they're invited and that they're welcome and they're going to be taken care of. And that's a responsibility. And so I think, yes, it does limit your options, or you figure out how to widen your scope a little bit.
Totally. I also, I love that at the end you put that caveat of they also have to feel welcome. Because I've worked on some productions where they're like, well, we invited everybody from a community, but nobody showed up. And I'm like, well, what did you do to like make them feel welcome? Did you try to understand different things that community deals with, or like some barriers that they might be experiencing that are preventing them from being involved? And that's a lot of work. And I understand that, educators, but if you want to do that material, that's what you have to do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think in the course that I'll be teaching this summer, I think we'll talk a lot about sort of how to build a space where all of those people feel invited and welcome and can exist and feel invited to your auditions. If you want to do a show where you need certain demographics, you need to make sure that you're supporting that demographic in your school. And that takes work and that takes energy. And if you feel like you don't have the capacity for that work, then it limits the amount of shows that you can do. And that's okay, because there's also plenty of shows that don't have gender or race specific roles. Yeah,
let's just be honest. The majority of the American musical theater canon was written by white people.
Totally. It does not have to be white people.
Right. Yeah.
Like, was originally a white person, Cinderella doesn't have to be white.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I love this.
Yeah, I think also to making sure that in the show that you choose, making sure that the minorities that are represented or people who are marginalized are represented, those characters are three-dimensional and sort of wholly and equitably represented. Because if they're not, then you shouldn't be doing the show in the first place. And also, again, students who fit that character are not going to want to audition for a role where they feel like they're stereotyped, where they feel like their identity is being represented incorrectly or insensitively. So making sure that the content itself, why is this particular character, why do they have to be a person of color? Why do they have to be a woman, or why do they have to be in a wheelchair, or like whatever specific thing there is about this character, is that person well represented in the script?
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, so keep those things in mind. Like I said, like this is a complicated issue, and we're kind of being like, here you go, without being like, wait, what? Wait, that's a lot of things for me to adjust to. So obviously comment your questions, and we will talk about some ways that you can work with us in the future if you would like at the end. Okay, so the second one was making sure that you have the students that are required for this show. 20% are going to be auditioning, if there's any specific requirements. Awesome. What's the third one? Give it to us. What's the last one?
Third one is the content relevant to your students and community? And this can look a lot of different ways. And honestly, most theater, most plays, most musicals do address some sort of universal human issue. But really sitting down with the issues that your community faces, the worlds and experiences that your students are interested in portraying and learning about, and seeing if there's a show that fits those things that you might want to talk about as a community, because that's what theater is for. And so also, I think I never shy away from asking students, what kinds of things are you interested in? Do you know of any musicals that you're excited about? Because if they're theater kids, they always will. And also if you sort of depend on community turnout, sort of figuring out what the community will respond to, something that they will come to, but also something that might start a conversation. So something that applies to them in some sort of way will engage them in a way that just choosing a show out of default won't.
Yes. Using a show out of default happens so much. I'm going to be honest. I don't feel like we need 4,000 productions of the, what is that show called? I can't think. Sound of Music every year. That's a show out of default.
Right.
And so, yeah, I really like that you're encouraging the directors to look beyond just what they want to do and engage with their students and the community, and to find that common ground, because honestly, most shows have a lot of dramaturgical support behind them, like most successful musicals, before 2000 especially, before we had the whole jukebox musical phenomenon, and movie musical, the playwrights really had a very direct story that they were telling that had a very specific theme. So like they aren't just like gonna be like, what should I do today? I'll write a fun musical that means nothing to the world. Like Wicked is like one of the most like, there is so much in Wicked. It is crazy. Like we could write for days about the different social ideas that they're talking about within that show. Yeah. So keep that in mind.
Yeah. I mean, even we were talking about when we were in Wisconsin together that like they were doing the Addams Family musical. And that show is like about, in a lot of ways, discrimination and difference and sort of like tradition in families. And like there's so many things in this very silly musical that if you at least pay attention to them, can be such a giant connective tissue for your audience and for your school.
Yeah. We have one question that from Matthew on Instagram that says, is it okay to change the moral of a show? What's your thought on that?
I think, that's hard because I think it depends show to show. I think it depends on what the moral is. I think you have to question if you have to change it. And this is sort of in my like 3 red flags, but I think if you have to change it, then it's worth it to sort of like question yourself deeper as to why you're doing it. I think if you disagree with the fundamental moral of a show, then there's probably a better show that represents what you actually want to say better, and where you don't have to sort of manipulate the content to mean what you want it to mean. So I would say if you're trying to change like sort of the integral structure and content of a show, or intent of a show, then maybe it's not a show worth doing if you strongly disagree with it.
Yeah.
If the music is great, the music is great in so many musicals, you could say that about a lot of different things. And I think there's probably a better suited show for you if you have to change it fundamentally. I think, if there's a word that you have to cut here and there, I think that's fine. But I think if you have to change the like actual fundamental intent of the show, then you should choose a different one or look deeper or sort of like read some.
Yeah, and I think also keep in mind that actually is illegal, and you have to it can depending on how far you go, it can be an infringement of copyright law. I actually did my Theater Insider Tuesday this week was on that question of, can I change a show to make it work for my students? And my gut is always no. You can enter it from a different lens. Like most of the time, I'm just using this as an example because I'm working on it right now. Les Mis, there are so many different angles to enter that story from. Doesn't always have to be about compassion and forgiveness. There are many other angles that you can enter it from, and that's okay. Actually be like
Shakespeare all the time. People put Shakespeare like totally different content.
Perfect example. Shakespeare, because you can go to 10 productions of As You Like It, and each will have a different idea and moral behind it. So I like your answer though of question why you're changing it, and are you just doing it because you want to do the music? Because find a different show.
Yeah, because there's plenty of good content and good musicals. Especially now, there's so many new musicals being written that probably might be less expensive too, that you maybe haven't looked into, that might be a little bit more intentionally written.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you're right that if you change it, if you are actually changing content, that's illegal. Potentially, you could get fined by the publishing company.
Yeah.
Because all of that material is copyright.
I mean, you can look it up online. It happens all the time, but they'll shut you down. Just have a look at it.
Totally.
Yeah. So awesome question. Thank you, Matthew. Okay, cool. So Cessa, we've got our 3 things that we need to make sure that we are paying attention to. What would you say are the 3 red flags? And then I think this will go quicker. What are the 3 red flags that we just need to make sure we're avoiding at all costs when selecting a show?
Totally. So this actually pertains to the last question, but the first one I have is if you have to edit out outdated or problematic context, language, if you have to manipulate things so that they're not offensive, it's probably not a show worth doing. I think if you have to take out racial slurs, if you have to take out sexist comments, then that show probably doesn't deserve to really be put on a stage anymore. It's not really relevant to your students anymore. And if you have to sort of like apologize for the script that you're putting on a stage, then there's probably a better suited show for you. And also, you're right. If you cut too much of a show, it can have legal and moral implications. But also, if you have to manipulate something that much, then it's probably not the show that you want to be doing anyway.
Yeah, totally. Oh, sorry, Instagram people. I just moved your camera up. Okay, cool. Okay, so what's the next? So the first one is totally got that. So don't manipulate.
Yeah, if you have to edit out content, it's probably not a great show for you. The second one is
before you go to that one, there was a question that came in. What do you think productions that change the date or setting of a show? It happens a lot in opera. All of a sudden, as doing like a classic opera in space, like as an example. Like, what do you think about that?
I think that's great. I personally really love reinventing scripts. I think that's awesome. I really love. A lot of people really hate when you like do Shakespeare, and like a lot of people hate like Baz Luhrmann. And Juliet, and I really love it. I think it's a really interesting context, and I think there's a difference between changing the fundamental meaning of the show and changing the lens through which we see it. So I actually don't see anything wrong with it as long as you're not changing language. And really, really good musicals and really good plays are going to lend themselves to potentially be put through a different lens. You know, there's obviously stuff that is sort of historical. You know, Hairspray is a historical. I would never put that in a different time or place because it's about the civil rights movement. But I think if you're dealing with something that sort of lends itself to that, that is totally okay. I love stuff like that. I love sort of turning things on their head. I love that idea. And I think changing content is a totally different thing.
Totally. And I also would say, on that, it just came up. I just encountered this recently. You have to make sure, though, that the estate is okay with it. So contacting whoever you buy the rights from to make sure it's like A-okay, because I wanted to do something and I was looking, I was like, oh, nope. Yeah.
And there are some favorites who are like, you can only my work exactly as I've written it. That those people exist for sure.
Totally.
Yeah.
Look at David Mamet. Don't ever try to change a single thing about them.
No.
Or they're really true. So, okay, so what's the second point?
So the second red flag I have is if you would need to cast white actors in non-white roles. Never, ever do that. Never even consider it. I think if a role is historically and fundamentally a role for a person of color or a woman is as well, I think this works for gender as well. I think and we'll talk about this more in the actual class, but it's a little bit different if women are playing male roles than if men are playing female roles because of the inequity, because of the imbalance. But you should never, ever be casting a white student in a role that is intended for a person of color. And that has to do partially with casting equity, but partially with representation as well. We want to make sure that characters that are people of color need to be played by people of color always. You know, and like people bend this all the time. People do Rent where they're like, well, this character doesn't have to be black. But it is really fundamentally important that you stay true to that piece, which I know is something that's hard when you like sort of flip that coin. Yeah. Not all characters or not all characters that are historically white, you know, or originally white in the original cast have to be white people. That's not true for the other side. And we'll talk a lot more about why that's true in the actual class, which we like don't have time to in the next 2 minutes. But that's a good sign. If you think that you might have to cast white people in non-white roles, then you shouldn't be doing the show.
I'm so glad you brought Rent up, and I'm really hoping that you'll talk through that because I still have questions about it too. With like, Benny and Angel and Mimi, and I'm like, wait, I'm so confused. I'm not like now, but it was like one of the ones that took me a really long time to piece through. And
Western, my college did Rent with an almost entirely white cast, and now looking at that, I'm like, we should not have done that. That was a bad idea. So that's the second one. It's pretty
awesome.
straightforward.
What's the third?
The third one is, if you can't answer the question, why this show, then you shouldn't be doing the show. If you can't really own the reason why you want to do it, because I like it is not a reason. Because it's a classic is not a reason. And because we always do it is not a reason.
If you never do a show because you always do it, that's crazy.
But there's plenty of, I know my high school sort of like leaned back on like, because this is a show that we do every 5 years or whatever, picking a show out of default or because it's sort of like in the classic sector. We'll also sort of talk about this, but sometimes when we say classical, we mean like based in white supremacy, which is like sort of a larger topic that we'll talk a lot about. And I don't mean that in like a direct or accusatory way. I really just mean it in like a lot of classical theater is based, it comes from white culture and doesn't come from anything else, and sort of oppresses other perspectives and other identities. And so if you can't really answer the question, why do you want to do this show? Why do you think it's important to do this show? Then find a show that you're more passionate about and more excited about.
Yes. I love these. I think this is a really easy checklist, educators. I mean, right now it's getting to summer, so you are either selecting shows or you're working through that process right now. These three yeses and these 3 red flags are really going to be important, and they're really easy checklists. Well, actually, we should just create a checklist and put it on the website because you said it so well. So check our website in like a week. It'll be on our resources page, which doesn't exist yet, but in a week it will. And we'll put together a nice checklist for you guys. And if you're a student, this is also something that just to like keep in mind when you're looking at what you're auditioning for. I know I've talked to some students who are like, can I call my educator out on something that they're doing? And I'm like, well, make sure that you're right before you do that. But yes, if you need to, not to like be subversive. I'm not saying that educators like.
But I think also you can question things without being accusatory. You know, you can sort of ask a question without being like, you are wrong. You can be like, I have a question about this thing.
Totally. And I think that's a really
acknowledge those things.
Yeah, and so that's a really great point. That like segues us into if this topic is of interest to you, whether you're an educator or a director or just a theater lover or even a student, if you are interested in learning more about race and ethnicity and gender and how that works into casting and into show selection, I would love to invite you to join Cessa this summer. She's going to be running a three-part series with us, and it's going to be covering all these different topics. It's going to be once a month in June, July, and August. And you can tune in for free, but if you pay for the course fee, you get the material recorded, which, as you can see, is very difficult material and probably be helpful. So you get the recorded material, you get a discussion. We're going to have a Facebook group where we can be discussing these topics. You also will get a one-on-one session with Cessa to ask questions more in-depthly about your specific show or your school or whatever you're working on. And you also will get a lot of awesome resources. I'm super excited about the resources part. So I can't wait to go through and read what everything Cessa's got going on. And I want to invite you because I know that when I started my work going through equity and understanding what this all means, like especially coming from a small town in Wisconsin, I felt really like, oh God, I'm being attacked and I'm a horrible person because I don't understand this. And that is not at all what this course is going to be. It's going to be, we understand your questions. I've worked on many a show that has made mistakes, to be totally honest. So I've been there. And Cessa is such a warm, lovely person who is so knowledgeable that I really encourage you to join us. And if you want to, we will put a link to the class that you can sign up in the comments of this video. And registration is open through June 20th. So I encourage you to sign up. And if her last point about the why is of interest to you, I'm actually teaching a 3-part course this summer in looking at dramaturgy and creating educational excellence and community engagement. It's literally called The Why. That's the class I'm teaching. Make your show matter. So there's lots of ways for you to engage with us. Both of those will be shown for free live, but in order to get the additional material, which you're definitely going to want, there'll be lots of great stuff. You just need to purchase that on our website. So we invite you to join us. thank you, Cessa, for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
I love talking about this and bringing this information out to people. So thank you for your time. And if you guys are watching this in replay, please feel free to write your comments. If you're on Facebook, if you're watching on Instagram, shoot me a DM. And yeah, I hope you guys have a great rest of your Thursday. I will be back next week. We're doing a Facebook Live with Lisa Fisher, who's a stylist, who's going to be showing us how to be confident in the rehearsal room and in the classroom. So that'll be a good one to catch, even if you're not a teacher. She's like amazing. She changed my life, how I dress. It made me way more confident. And then on Tuesday, we're going to be talking to Kate Yeager, who's an educator and director in Seattle. Yeah, she's awesome. And we're going to be talking about how to make your rehearsal room full of risk takers rather than direction takers. So it'll be a good one. But yeah, so keep an eye out. We'll have a couple other Facebook Lives before registration closes. But thank you all for joining, and have a great Thursday. Bye.
Bye.